Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2024 release Sleep. I actually rented this film through Fandango at home for $7.41 with tax, but there's something you need to know. If you are interested in checking it out, which I do recommend because it is a good film. I had heard this was a good film, and it is. Don't rent it from Fandango at home because for some reason it is only in English dubs. And I looked, and there's no subtitled version. There's no way to turn on Well, you can turn on English subtitles, but the dubbing stays. There's no way to turn off the English dubbing. And it's just weird that they don't call that out, like, in the description of it. It specifically doesn't say, like, English dubbed. And I looked for it. I was just like, what is going on? Because it really does detract from the actual performances. So I did my best to kind of, like, put that behind me basically and look at this film for what it is, which it is a good film. I do recommend checking it out. It's a nice one. So this film is written and directed by Jason Yu. It is a South Korean film, so it should just be subtitled, but this whole situation. Quick synopsis of this film. It's about a married couple. Specifically, it's from the perspective of the wife, who starts to notice some very concerning things with her husband and his sleep, hence the title. Basically, he started to scratch at his face a bunch. He's saying things in his sleep. He started doing some sleepwalking, and there are other things that are end up being kind of dangerous that are tied into that. And, they go for help and everything, but it becomes this question of what is really going on. Is this all like sleep apnea related, or is this something further? Because obviously it's a horror film, so is there something else going on here? And they do a really good job of kind of casting doubt on the perspective that you're seeing this through, which is the wife, of being like, well, is this just what she thinks she's seeing, or is this what she's actually seeing, and what's behind that if this is what she's actually seeing? And they do a really good job, too, of keeping that up in the air until literally, like, the very end of the film, like the last, I don't know, like 15 minutes maybe, 10 to 15 minutes. So, like, the final scene is where you get your answer, and I think that it's very smart that they decided to do it that way. But that's all I'm going to give you as far as synopsis goes, but obviously, like I said, I do recommend this one. It's a good film. The very beginning of it has some good tension, but it ultimately felt a little bit perplexing because it felt tonally conflicted, because it's got like some good tension. You're like, oh, this is kind of scary, and then all of a sudden it's like they try to put a little bit of humor in it, and you're like, is this going to be one of those films that like tries to inject humor when it really shouldn't? But thankfully, as the film goes on, there are additional humorous moments, but they don't feel like that. It doesn't feel like they're interrupting something. It doesn't feel like, you're in like a good tense scene, and then there's a speed bump of humor where you're just like, whoa, what was that? Like, why did we decide to do this? So it does kind of calm down. I was concerned at first when that happened, but they iron that out afterwards. You do really feel the main character's frustration, and I'm not just talking about the issue of trying to deal with what's going on with her husband, but also just her life frustrations. You feel her stress. You feel just all of her emotions kind of boiling over, and there's a really great scene that sums this type of stuff up when she's at work, when you really, really feel it, and you're like, oh, okay, like, this is how frustrated she is. So they do such a good job of kind of like putting you in her shoes, and you can see yourself being like, if I'm in this situation, like, I'm stressed out too. Big time stressed out. So you do really feel for her. They do throw the main character's perspective into question, which very early, I will say. The relationship between the main character and her husband feels a little bit weird. So for that reason, like, I didn't know which way they were trying to go with this. I also didn't know if they were trying to make it a little more comedic at first, because the relationship just doesn't feel right. It feels very off. Now, there is a reason for that in the end, I think, looking back on it, which honestly I wasn't thinking about until just doing this. And it does kind of make it one of those films where maybe it would make sense to watch it a second time if you liked it enough to be like, oh, now I'm catching this, now I'm catching this. So that is interesting. The film is shot in an engaging way, so you aren't visually bored even when there are kind of mundane scenes, because there is a repetition with this film. There are a bunch of scenes that they have play out that feel very similar, and for that reason, that is a bit of a problem, but it is helped by the fact that it is well shot. It is very engaging. Like the camera movements that they have, the angles they choose, kind of interesting. It's not your standard straightforward cinematography. They're doing a little bit more to keep you visually engaged. So that's very helpful. That said, from a script standpoint, they really needed to kind of cut some of this down in order to not have all these super repetitive scenes. Just my thoughts. There is something that happens that could be triggering for people, but thankfully it's off camera. I'll just tell you right now, it does have to do with an animal, but it doesn't actually happen on screen, and you don't see it. Like, you don't hear it, and you don't see it. It's kind of just someone discovering the aftermath of it. So just know that. So that is kind of like a trigger warning, because I know people really like to have those types of trigger warning, especially when it comes to things like kids being in danger and animals. And this is the animal one, obviously. There are scenes that feel pretty repetitive, like I just said. I'm getting repetitive now. You see how I did that? It wasn't intentional. Some of the scenes do get pretty intense. There is a good tension building that that Yu is able to create with his script writing, and the atmosphere feels good with the film. Obviously, it contributes. Sorry, one of those moments. It contributes to those moments where you're starting to feel the tension really build. So that's great. The ending is pretty good, especially because things are kept up in the air for quite some time, like I already said. That is one of the primary reasons, if not the primary reason, that the ending hits as well as it does. Also, I just think it's kind of an interesting idea that's thrown at you for the ending of the film. Like I said, again, it kind of makes you think, oh, maybe if I decided to go back and rewatch this film, I would kind of pick up on some other stuff. And I do definitely think that you would. So it is a unique enough story. That said, I do think it is a bit slow in its pacing, like I was saying with the whole repetitive thing. And they should have actually cut it down a little bit. But I also think it was one of these things where they're trying to really hit home with how frustrating things are, how repetitive the days of the main character are with dealing with all these stressors, especially with what's going on with her husband. So, or she thinks, either way, not gonna say. Anyway, the last thing that I wanted to point out is this is about life anxieties and fearing that who you choose to spend your life with won't always necessarily act like the person that you want them to be or the person that you met. Now, obviously, it is a situation in real life where, you meet people, you forge relationships, and people change. Like, that is very normal. If you're not actually changing as a person as you age, you're not living correctly, honestly. You're not learning from experiences and being changed by experiences. But it is this fear that a person you're with or trying to spend your entire life with is going to change in such a way that is bad, that maybe you just can't deal with them, or they become abusive, or whatever it is. I'm not saying that ties into this actual film, the abusive part, but it's just one of those things. But I do think this is an interesting take on what it's doing, and I do recommend it. Out of 5 stars, I'd give it a 3.5-star rating. So would love to hear other people's opinions on it, especially if you've seen it. Go ahead and put it down in the comments, and we can talk spoilers in the comments. Real quick, hit subscribe to my channel if you want to support me. Also, you can monetarily support me if you want. For a little bit of money each month, you can get some perks with the channel. That is in the description. There's a link for that so you can see what that is. Thumbs up on the video is very helpful, and if you want to hit the notification bell button, you will then know when I'm putting up new videos. But regardless, thank you so much for taking your time to watch this, and until next time, keep it brutal.